Awesome. So Chris, maybe we could start with some introductions. Do you want to kick it off?
Yep. Yeah, I think we could probably start kind of moving into it. About 6:04. I think we've probably got everybody that's going to be trying to move in, get in here. This little one is Lily. Her mother is going to be home in about 3 minutes. So you won't get to know her very well tonight. But my name is Chris Lee. I'm head of design and development at Backyard ADUs. We've been at Backyard ADUs since I started working on the company 4 years ago. And I'm pretty excited to be here tonight to talk about DIY shells with Tim O'Reilly, who's our basically runs small home advisory in Massachusetts. And Avril Williams, who's our head of marketing and has been running our newsletters, our social media. She's been doing some really neat stuff for our new homeowners. And I think tonight we'll probably talk for most of the time. DIY shells are a really big topic.
Great, thanks, Chris. And we've been rolling out this DIY product for probably over a year now. We've had some guinea pigs, some people who met us and went out on a limb and did DIY shells with us, and we've learned a lot from that. And we've taken it, and we're off to the races. So we have a great sort of back office design and development, and then in-house construction services. And we're going to go over all of that tonight. And we're excited to share it with you. So again, a couple people just trickled in. Thanks for joining. Go ahead and fire off in that Q&A section tonight to interact with us so that we make sure we're answering all your questions and spreading as much knowledge as we can. So I'll go ahead and get things started here. Great. So Chris, where did this DIY shell concept originate from? Why is this something that we're doing?
Yeah, so DIY shells, hold on one.
All right, mom's home. So DIY shells. Oh, Chris.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that, everybody. The joy of doing at 6 o'clock with a newborn and a wife that works in a hospital. It doesn't always leave right at 5. So we started working on DIY shells in response to just how much costs have increased over the last 4 years. When we started working on Backyard ADUs, costs were like 50% less. It's quite incredible how much stuff has come up. So we knew that we needed to find a way to allow people to get creative, save some money, and quite honestly, not pay our overhead. So that's why we've been working on DIY shells. And we want to talk to you about kind of what we're doing differently with shells and why we think that they're going to allow anyone to kind of become a GC and build their own house.
Blah, blah, blah.
So if you want to jump to the next slide, we'll start going right into this.
Whatever that means.
So I think the first thing that we want to nail down, a DIY shell may not be what you think of. There are other companies out there. I don't know if anyone's seen Studio Shed. They're a really neat company out of Boulder. Go Logic out of Belfast. They do shells. Unity does shells out of New Hampshire. But those shells are built. They're panelized. They're panelized construction, so they're not very finished, and they really require a lot of work to get them to a point where you can move in and get an occupancy permit. Our shells are different because we're building with volumetric modular boxes. And what that means is we're going to be setting modular boxes down that are basically done. And this photo, Mama's home. This photo is of a kitchen of a home immediately after we set it in Williamstown, Mass. Then you can see that the kitchen is done. There's drywall in. The kitchen sink is in and plumbed. There's a lot that's already completed. And in some cases, if we're doing a single box, it could even be 95% done. So we're eliminating a lot of the risk and trying to and reducing the tasks that need to get completed to things I would call handyman level. So as I was saying, and as Tim has been saying, a big part of these shells is to try to save people money. And there's three big areas where the savings are going to come from. The first big savings is basically kicking back your ADUs out of the construction project management, not having to pay our construction managers and not having to pay our overhead, our insurance, and all the things associated with running a construction business. And that generally is like 20 to 35,000 in a typical size project. And it's a big chunk of money. That tends to be about 10% of a project budget. So when you pull that out, you get pretty far ahead, and you can either leave that in your pocket or you can use that to do other things with it. The next big one is going to be kind of the true form of DIY. Every time you do something that you could have paid somebody to do, whether it's drywall or electrical work or siding, you're going to save that money. And the going labor rates right now for a handyman, you could probably find someone for $35 an hour, but more likely than not, you're going to be paying over $60 an hour to have somebody working on stuff. And the pace at which they work is going to be all over the place. So every hour that you can get something done, you're saving potentially $60. And the hours add up quickly at that rate. And then the other thing that we've heard a ton of, everyone seems to know somebody, whether it's somebody with a digger, somebody who knows how to do electrical work, someone who can do plumbing. And when you ask your friend or your neighbor to help out with one of those things, you're going to get a lot better price than we can get. So if you're not comfortable doing electrical or excavation, but you know somebody, it might be time to call on that favor and see if you can get friends and family pricing. And that is a big source of potential savings. So as we've been thinking about DIY shells, the first thing that comes to our mind is it's really not easy to be a GC. It's a really difficult job. And we've been thinking, how do you make sure that somebody can actually be a GC? And the key things that are involved in that, GCs need to have good pricing data, which means you need to have good pricing data, because it's unlikely that you're going to do every single task. You're probably going to sub something out, whether it's the electrical, the plumbing, or the excavation. But how the heck do you know how the heck are you going to know if somebody is giving you a good price? Because if anyone, I'd love to hear from people in the audience, if they've tried to get quotes and what kind of ranges they've seen. But we've been getting quotes from GCs in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine, and the ranges, even within small areas, can be 100% different. So having reliable data to know if you need to call BS on someone's quote is really important. And that's one of the things that we bring forward. And we'll show you some of the budgets that we share when we do the shells. Next thing is you need to have a lot of lifelines. The thing that GCs have, that a good GC has, if they can pick up the phone and call anybody, and then call anybody to get them out of a pickle. Because when you're building a house, stuff happens, and you got to be able to know somebody to call. So in this situation, we're the lifeline. Basically, we're on call to help get through anything. And we really hate doing it, but if you can't find an electrician and you're 6 months into the project, we'll help you find an electrician. So like, we're there as a lifeline. We're not there as much where we need to charge overhead and project management, but we can be available on FaceTime for troubleshooting. We can be available for a phone call. We want to help make it easier, so you know what you're getting into and how to troubleshoot things as they come up. And then finally, you need as many guarantees as possible. The more you can check off and say that's definitely going to happen, the better. And that's why we do a shell that's as complete as possible, because the more that we can get done in our facility that's been QA'd and signed off by state inspectors, the better. The more that you open up to being done locally that you have to look at, the more likely something's going to either go wrong or take a really long time. So we're bringing in that modular box that's mostly finished, and that's how we're trying to bring a guarantee to the table. And then finally, you need patience, you need determination, and you're going to need grit. We're not going to sugarcoat it. It is difficult. It is going to take a long time. But if you have the time, you can get this done. You definitely can. You just got to be patient. You got to be patient when the plumber doesn't show up for 2 weeks and he said he's going to be there every other day. And I didn't specifically calling out plumbers. It happens with just about anyone. It could be the project manager. It could be an electrician. It really could be anyone. It's just there's a lot of things going on for everybody. So patience and determination and those 3 points. So with that's kind of the overview of what we're doing. Now I'm going to hand it off to Tim, and we're going to talk really specifically about what happens when we're doing the design phase. What are we designing? What are you picking? And then some of the types of activities that you're going to do inside, outside, connecting utilities, and then finally with site work. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. We don't really shy away from anything. So you can throw the hard ones our way too.
Awesome. Yeah. So the beauty of our design phase is it's going to allow you to do all these things. So we're going to figure a lot of stuff out up front so that you can wrap your head around this project and take it on. So let's try to reload here. We get that to go. Awesome. So designing and planning with backyard ADUs is the same whether you're doing a DIY shell or an in-house project with backyard. And the beauty of that is we are really experienced. We build a lot of these houses, and we're going to help you move through this phase. And that involves both in-house design work, but also dealing with the town. And then, like Chris mentioned, getting good bids and figuring out the whole scope. So it typically starts with a site sketch or a site plan. It depends on where you are, whether they're going to require a stamped surveyed plan, or can we go off more of a site sketch? That's typically in more rural areas. We're going to work on the design and the layout. What do you want? How big is it? What's the furniture that's going in there? How are you going to use it? And all that is going to trickle into the budget. So how big is it? What are we building? What's the footprint? How does it look on site? What's going on that site? Where are the utilities? So it's all going to funnel together. We're going to pick our finishes. So if we're doing the kitchen in the factory, all right, we're going to pick counters, cabinets, backsplash, plumbing fixtures, sinks, etc. If you're saying, hey, I want to DIY that kitchen, we'll pull that out and you'll figure that all out on site. But again, in this process, we're going to sort of shake all these different pieces out. And at the end, really looking at the budget and what's going to work.
Yeah, I guess I would highlight too. So saw someone's in here from South Portland, someone's from Belmont. We've got different cities and towns. So the site sketch and the site plan, what's required is really going to depend on where you're actually located in the city requirements. And I just want to point, like, what you might need to do something in a big 2-acre lot may be very different than what you need in Portland, Maine. And it may have different cost implications too. So that's important to kind of figure out as you're engaging in the project, whether you to figure out what you're actually going to need and if you need to hire a civil engineer to pull it together.
Yeah, it's a really great point too about how every town is different. And towns that we have built in, we've sort of already gone through this whole process. And when we're thinking about site sketch and layouts and finishes, either our experts in Maine or in Mass are going to know if certain towns are going to require certain things, or maybe we're going to have to do certain design elements to fit and meet bylaws and requirements. But part of the beauty of building in that factory is everything is going to get inspected and stamped So everything is going to meet code, whether you're in Mass or in Maine, but we can also add in non-code things. A good example is electrical. So, hey, I want a special outlet here, a USB outlet in the kitchen. I want my grandmother's chandelier in the office. I have an electric car. I don't want a car charger. We can sort of go above all the code requirements and add those special touches to make it your house. And then at the end, as we're gonna go through tonight, we're gonna outline that whole project. What are you taking on in the DIY sense? And then what is Backyard ADUs gonna do? And what are we gonna deliver?
Tim,
So
is there anything special that people in Mass have to do to do a DIY? I know in Maine, permits get issued to anyone as long as you have a roll of duct tape. But what is there anything special in Mass?
Yeah, in Mass, we're beholden to certain energy ratings and codes that are, like Chris is alluding to, much more strict than Maine. So part of what we do at Backyard ADUs to help you through this process is, as we're designing, we're going to go through and look at all the energy specs. What are the appliances going in there? What's the mini split unit? We're going to generate a report that estimates your energy usage and how energy efficient the house is. And that's going to be required to give that to your town to issue your permits, and then to do any required follow-up tests in order to move in. So Backyard ADUs is going to help you through sort of these more nuanced requirements in Mass.
I had a question too, that you may want to explain, because with all of our full builds that we do, we always say that step one is to schedule that feasibility study. And is that still, because we just said that design phase is step one, but would we still be doing that feasibility study prior to that design phase?
Yeah, feasibility is key, because all successful construction projects come down to how well was it planned and how well thought was the budget. So no matter what anybody here does, making sure, even if you hire a general contractor to do this whole thing for you, you need to make sure that budget is bulletproof and that everything has been thought through, because it's the pieces that you don't think about that blow the project up, cause delays, and cause budget overruns. So that feasibility has got to happen one way or the other, whether you're out there with a site inspector, you got to bring every single sub over there. You've got to do the feasibility step.
Awesome. And yeah, that due diligence and planning, both in the feasibility and then in this planning design phase, are going to enable that DIY shell to move forward with that confidence, where you know exactly what's going to happen. What are we providing? What are you doing? Who's managing who, to get all the details done. Sweet. So on to construction. So on the outside, we're gonna go through a bunch of photos, but I just wanted to outline it in text. So that house that arrives is weatherproof. Backyard ADUs is going to set it. We're going to roof it, and it's going to be watertight and weatherproof. Typically, for about a half a year. We did one of these DIY shells up in New Hampshire. We set the house in October, and the homeowner said, "You know what? I really don't want to, be finishing this house, doing the siding."
He actually got in a motorcycle accident in Florida. He basically got hit by some guy blindsided and was in the hospital all winter. So he had no choice, but he did make it back this spring, and I think he started when he got back. He got back from Florida in May, and I think he's going to be moving in next month. But it was not willful. He got in a motorcycle. Yeah, it was crazy. But his did sit for 180 days straight through the winter with no heat, through all the heating and cooling cycles in it, and it did just fine.
Awesome. Yeah. And so part of that, making it weather tight, is our exterior sheathing product. We're going to look at some photos of that. But on top of that, you got to do the siding. And that's a great DIY scope. Whether you're doing something that we can install in the factory or you're finding it on site, But that also goes for the fascia and soffit materials that we're looking at. Chris, you added this pro tip about the house is not vermin proof until the soffits are installed. Is there an example that comes from?
Yeah, I put that in there because the stuff can get in, and there's not a great reason for mice or anything to go into an empty shell. There's no warmth or anything. But if you do start running heat in these and you have not finished the siding, or you have not put specifically the soffit on, there's a good chance, especially if it's in the fall, that you will get mice coming in these things. So you do want to be a little bit careful of that. One example, I've been quasi DIYing my new house, as I've been patiently waiting my turn to have it finished by our team. But we've started a little bird breeding situation in the garage. Not fully by choice, but it's been fun watching eggs hatch. And that's just an example, and that's due to garage doors being back ordered. On that, the birds just flew right in. But it is weatherproof. I think that's the key thing, and it's weatherproof because of the siding products. And 180 days is actually Zip-R's wet weather rating. So Zip-R says the system can sit for half a year before it's going to start breaking down to UV rays, and you're going to have to redo all the taping.
Awesome. Great. So let's take a look. The photos tell a lot. Tools. Your back area to you home advisor is going to help you in that planning phase, but just want to sort of give you a quick overlook. A lot of these are hand tools, things to think about. Ladders, maybe you'll want some staging, but a lot of this is pretty simple tools that you'll need to do siding. Cool. So this is a house that we set in East Hampton. So these boxes came straight out of our factory. And you'll notice that with vinyl siding here, some is already installed. So one of the benefits of that factory is this is all set and ready. About 40% of that vinyl siding is installed. The rest of it, it's all inside. So these 12-foot boxes that are sort of unruly, heavy, hard to carry, I couldn't strap on the top of my car. It's all there in that DIY shell. So it shows up, some is done, the rest is inside. But you have all the material you need. This long white stuff, this is the aluminum fascia, and then buried in here as well is the vinyl soffit. So that is all shipped loose if you're doing vinyl. But there's also a bunch of options. So the Zip product that Chris just talked about is an external sheathing and insulation layer. This is ready to receive any non-vinyl options. So board and batten, clapboards, anything that you're thinking of doing can just be nailed right off into that Zip product after all those seams are taped. Alternatively, this is another one that came out of the factory. This is a different product, also weather resistant. But this vinyl siding, again, some was installed in the factory, and then the rest, all those materials are inside, or in this case, they got moved outside, but they're ready to go on, and not included in the images, but also shipped in the houses like corners. So let's take a look at the soffit and fascia. So here's our crew working out in the field. This is straight from the factory. The roof is installed, but they need to do the work to put the fascia, do the returns, and install that soffit on the underside here.
And I would say that center photo is metal bending. So there's a couple different ways that you could, if you go with metal siding, you can use a big metal brake like this and bend your own siding. I would not recommend anyone attempt to do that unless they've done it before. But there are other options. We can do typically a pre-bent aluminum, which is an inexpensive option. But the easiest fascia material to work with is going to be either actual wood or to work with a PVC like ASIC. You just basically screw them on or nail them on, as is typical, whereas aluminum can be very finicky and you have to worry about heating and contracting. So there's a little bit of skill involved.
Yeah, and the other thing we see here with traditional stick framing with that outside exterior, you got to worry about windows. But in this case, we're getting those all installed and weatherproofed in the factory. So on the left, that's straight from the factory. And on the far right, we're just, in this case, for this window trim, we're just bringing it right up, leaving a little expansion gap. But it's fairly simple trim work to get all that vinyl installed.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're doing the weather sealing. So we're flashing the windows. We're making sure water's not leaking through there. You're just putting the siding on and essentially making sure it looks good. That's the key of putting it on. Oh, and making sure birds don't get in your soffit.
Exactly. Great. And so when I mentioned there's a ton of options, I wasn't joking. So these are a couple example of houses we finished where the homeowners have had a certain vision, and we went out and executed. So here's a house we did in Western Mass. They chose to go with vinyl siding for the majority of the house, which is the black clapboard you see here, but also with LP Smartboard, which is an engineered wood product. So they have this contrasting board and batten and then clapboard look. Down here, this is all PVC or vinyl and PVC. So it's cedar impression shakes, which is a vinyl product, vinyl clapboards, and then this is that PVC fascia that Chris was talking about. It's super easy to mark, cut, nail, or screw up, or screw on. It's not, you could screw it up, but you want to screw it on. And then this house over here, they also used a variety of products where they did LP, they did wood, and they did this Maybach decking, which just looks fantastic.
Yeah,
So,
and from a price standpoint, we've got 3 different things here, and they're all different price levels. So the vinyl, polymer, and PVC is the least expensive siding job. It gets the most out of vinyl and does accenting with a clear trim product for corners and around the windows, and then it uses those cedar impressions, which are polymer. And then above that, we've got the vinyl and LP Smartboard. That's probably the center most expensive because of how much LP work is on there. And an LP just tends to be a slightly more expensive material, and it takes longer to put on. And then it's also painted locally. So that paint, all those colors match because the LP was painted there. And then finally, the one on the right, which is in South Portland, is the most expensive siding job. It's got actual cedar shingles that are stained, that are a Maybach product. It's got LP Smart Side. It's got actual wood corners and wood trim work, and then that cedar deck. So there's a lot you can do with siding, a lot of different price points, and the center one for a DIY job, that vinyl, polymer, and PVC is probably the one we would recommend tackling as DIY if you're going to do your own siding, because it's the most forgiving than some of the other ones.
yeah, and we'll look at later sort of the real breakdown of labor and materials, because that's a big consideration here. It's both what do you have experience working with, and then what's the total budget for both of those together.
Could you explain what is LP again?
Yeah, LP, Louisiana Pacific, so it stands for. It's just the LP is the company, and it's an engineered wood product. It's essentially a outdoor rated particle board. So it's made of wood and resins. It's kind of like a middle ground as far as environmental friendly is concerned. But it's a very robust product. It's got nice sharp corners like hardy board, but it's not as bad for the environment as hardy board. So it's a product that we really like to use when we're upgrading siding.
And I can't remember exactly the guarantee they offer, but it's going to hold paint better.
Yeah,
so not to repaint it as often, which is the big allure.
Can you also source cedar shingles?
We did for the house on the right in South Portland. So those are Maybach, which is a high-end brand of cedar shingles, and they're stained, but they also offer a clear product. And then we could also do natural. So there's a lot of different options for cedar. And I'd imagine down on the Cape, for those of you listening on the Cape, there may be a desire to match your neighbors and do some actual cedar shakes.
Awesome. Any other questions on the exterior before we dive into the inside? All right, let's do it. So interior finish work. Here's a house. This was on set day. And right here, we're looking at that marriage wall. So this is where our two boxes come together. And we'll look at more what it takes to finish the interior. If the slideshow will load. So again, it's sort of a tool overview. Again, a lot of hand tools. So you need sort of basic power tools, but also hand tools to do all that finish work, and drywall tools as well. So what are you going to do? We were just looking at that marriage wall. That's typically the biggest amount of drywall that you're going to need to do. Luckily, that material ships inside. So again, you don't have to try to strap a sheet of drywall on top of your Camry. The material you need is there, but the work to do that, it's typically straightforward. And then any small cracking, which is normal. Inside, this is again in that design phase, you're going to figure out and plan exactly what you're going to do. Are you going to do your own painting? Are you going to do your own flooring? Are you going to go down the rabbit hole and do your own kitchen or do your own bathroom? We're going to figure all that stuff out and have it all outlined for you.
Yeah, and what we've seen, it comes down to, can you save money on things like kitchen cabinets by finding them at Habitat for Humanity Restore? Or on the other side of that, do you just want to do a amazing ultra custom kitchen where someone's doing it for you, or you might be building those cabinets? You basically want to create the opportunity for that to happen, whatever the reasons might be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't put those photos in, but we had a customer recently design and build their own peninsula island. So they had old reclaimed barn wood, and they've sort of made this centerpiece between the kitchen and the living room of this beautiful peninsula island. I'll have to add those photos in. But yeah, so painting from our factory, the walls come primed, which you see in here. All the trim comes primed, and it would be your responsibility to finish that painting. So put a coat on the ceiling, pick your coats for the walls, and then do another coat of a final seal on all the trim work. Yeah, pretty straight.
It makes sense to get a 4-foot roller. So another little pro tip: when you're painting ceilings, buy a 4-foot wide roller, and it will cut your time by probably 75%. It'll go very quickly.
And the other key is lighting. So as being your own GC, thinking about the construction schedule, when is power going to get turned on? If you're painting before that, it's super handy to either have an extension cord, or in this case, a battery powered light, to make sure that you're getting it right the first time. Another thing I noticed in these photos is floors. So in this case on the right, this is the subfloor installed straight from the factory, and sitting all in front of us, the homeowner wanted to do hardwoods. So they sourced hardwood flooring locally. That's all sitting and waiting inside. But in this case, they're going to paint the ceiling first so that they don't have to worry about getting splatter all over their installed floors. And then on the left, this flooring got installed in the factory. And so you can see it's all covered up with cardboard and all the seams are taped. So again, when you start painting, you're not damaging the floor or having to clean paint off later. At the end, you can just come pull all that out and get yourself moved in.
Yeah, that could be a good budget savings thing. So when we're going to do the house, we're going to put the floor in earlier, and then we're going to put ram board on top of it. And that makes us doing your house slightly more expensive than if you do your house, because we need to do that for the scheduling purposes and as far as subs go. But if you have a longer timeline, you could change the order of operations and not pay the price for that ram board.
Awesome. So inside drywall, I grabbed a couple photos. Here's another marriage wall on the left. So that's the structural framing that we see. And you can see that we're starting to put the drywall in to cover that up, and then do the mudding work to make a nice, beautiful opening between those two boxes. Another place we'll look at is around the electrical panel. That arrives open so that utilities can get hooked up, but you'll need to put some drywall in around that and then do a couple coats of mud to get that finished. But this, between the marriage wall and the electrical panel, is typically the only hanging of drywall you have to do. The majority of your mudding will be here, and then also any little cracking that's normal.
Yeah, and we'll let you know too, as we're figuring out the layout, that if you're making decisions and we're putting a design together that's going to significantly complicate the finish if you're doing a DIY. So we'll let you know if you're complicating your marriage wall connection and creating more drywall. We'll let you know if your vaulted ceiling is going to blow up your schedule. We're going to help you decide whether or not you should make some of these decisions.
Awesome. Just another thing that caught my eye is doors here. So you'll see here, this door is fully trimmed out and installed by the factory. And so that's another beautiful thing about the factory is we picked the doors we wanted, but they're all there. They're all inside. They're all hung. They're going to need a little adjustment, but the majority of the work's already been done for you. All right. This one not loading. Yeah. So we just outlined here, sort of thinking about, again, back to savings. Where can you find it? Materials is one thing. Can you find a good deal at Lumber Liquidators? Are you buying it all on tax-free weekend? Where are you getting those floors? You might be able to save on the material, paint. And then if you go to things like Chris was saying, maybe finding used cabinets, or you had old pile from another job or something like that. But the big savings will be in labor. So sort of all these tasks that we have to charge for, if you take it on yourself, there's going to be some great savings for all the hours there. But this is typically our interior scope. I pulled this off of our costing master. So this is all the stuff we have to pay our crew to do that you can take on. So,
and to put number values to that, kind of the handyman carpentry type labor that goes into these houses once they're set is anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000. And that's basically paying carpenters to be there, plus the overhead of doing business and keeping everybody insured and making sure everyone doesn't have to work 60-hour weeks and not get paid anything. So it's anywhere from 20 to 40 grand that you would take out of the price if you do all of the inside work. So depending how quick and how talented you are, it's a really large chunk of money when you think that the cost when we're doing the whole thing is anywhere from $250 to $350. You can really start whittling these numbers down and get these things very affordable.
All right, so we'll take a look beyond what gets done in the factory, what you're going to do on the outside, and what you're going to do on the inside above the foundation. And that's another thing we've honed in with on this DIY product is we know all that above the foundation stuff, but to be your own GC, you need to think about the whole thing. And that's going to involve site work, the foundation, and everything we're going to look at now. This is that project we looked earlier at the house in East Hampton. This is the site. So this was the prep work that we hired our excavator to do. In this case, they're doing the shallow frost protected foundation. So it's a relatively shallow hole, but we have the sewer pipe stubbed and the water pipe stubbed. And this is what we hired our excavator to do. So going back to what's a good price for this, we sort of have that pricing data in Mass and Maine, and we'd help you go out and get bids, or we may send our site work guy to do this a la carte for you.
Yeah, this is I would say site work, getting the site work and the foundation right, especially the site work. This is where I think homeowners have the potential to get in the most trouble from a budget standpoint. Machine days are very expensive. Machine rates range from anywhere from $1,300 to $2,000 per day for when somebody's there sitting behind that, and that doesn't include fuel. So if you can think, if someone's sitting in your backyard for 10 days at $2,000 a day, it adds up very, very quickly. So making sure that they know what they're doing and getting them in and out is very, very important. And I say all of that because this is something that we are routinely going to package and include with our shells. So we're taking care of the site work with our trusted site work professionals. and getting the house on the foundation to eliminate that risk point. So you can just have something that can sit worry-free for half a year if needed. And it adds a little bit of overhead that you have to pay for us to do that. But it does eliminate a lot of the risk. And again, the goal of a DIY shell is to save as much money as possible, but eliminate the risk of you getting in over your head and being in a situation where you have to spend more money than you anticipated.
Yeah, and we could talk all day about horror stories that we've experienced in our sort of 4 years of construction here of sort of getting in hot water with that site work piece. Exactly why we've sort of learned our lesson and packaged this in a way to eliminate that risk.
And
All right.
someone had asked that if we were just in Maine and Massachusetts, but Tim, you had mentioned we had done a shell in New Hampshire as well.
Yep, we've done a shell in New Hampshire, and we've flirted with sort of Rhode Island and Vermont as well. But we're up here in New England. So if you're tuning in from outside New England, thanks for joining us. We'll be happy to point you in the right direction and still hop on a call and hear what you have in mind and provide some expertise.
Yeah, our core finish teams for the all-in-one house are on the Cape in Boston, Western Mass, and Maine. But we have a much bigger range for the DIY shells. We're very much willing to travel up into northern New Hampshire or into Vermont, because we were able to send guys up there for a day, get this house taken care of, and then provide that support over the phone and FaceTime, because finishing a house in Vermont or northern New Hampshire is very similar to finishing it in southern Maine or on the Cape.
Awesome. So this is typically what we're doing here, that shallow frost protected foundation. So once that site was prepared, we came in and we laid our Dendura blocks, reinforced it with rebar, insulated our slab from below and also our wing insulation, made sure everything was square and precise so that when our house parts arrive, everything fits and can get hooked up securely and safely. An alternative to that, this is someone who wanted a full basement up in Maine, and with all the rain this year, tongue twisters. It turned in to look like we were digging a swimming pool, but we were able to finish that one. You'll see here, this is that finished basement. They haven't poured the inside slab yet or done any of the interior drywall work. But whether you're thinking of doing shallow frost protected or doing a full basement, it's all possible. Both the DIY shells I've worked on were a full basement. So the homeowner went out, they knew someone that was a concrete contractor, an excavator. They lined up that bid and scope. And all we did is we came back and made sure that that foundation was square and ready to receive the house parts that they had designed.
I just want to interject for a second. I know a few people keep raising hands with questions, but if you just want to pop your question into that Q&A box, I know some people came a little later. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can put any questions you have right in there, and I'll interject and jump in and be your voice for you.
Awesome. Yeah, so there's a bunch of different options with foundation. Again, it goes back to that design phase where we're looking at what do you want, what are your needs, and what's the budget to make those work. Cool. So a big part is utilities. We looked at that electrical panel earlier with the drywall work. Well, this is it coming from the factory. On the right, the panel's installed, the wires are in, again, to all the switches, outlets. But you'll notice on the bottom, there's no electrical service yet. So being your own GC is managing the subcontractors that are going to help get this house hooked up and connected. So you may do that finished drywall work, but you're going to need to get the electrician to run the service up into the panel. And then you'll see on this left photo, they've added some more wires there. They've pulled the second box in, and now the whole house is wired together.
Yeah, and these utility hookups are when you're working on your own house, you can do this stuff. You don't necessarily need the license. So if you fancy yourself in an electrical panel and feel you can figure it out, or you have a friend who you can call, You can certainly try to do this. You can pull your own permit, and the electrical inspector in your town is going to look over your shoulder, and he's hopefully going to tell you if you did it wrong. I know it's town by town. Some inspectors are going to get really annoyed if you keep calling them over and it continues to be wrong. But I think a lot of inspectors in a lot of towns are going to kind of like the idea that you're trying to do this and need to do this to save some money. Utility hookups, I will say, we are going to be less able to answer and direct specific questions on electrical stuff, just because of the licensed nature of it. We can help troubleshoot if something's not working, but we'll be a little bit more difficult to tell you how to hook up a breaker just from a liability standpoint. But circling back, you can do this. You certainly can do this. I was the quote unquote electrician for the houses that I've built with backyard ADUs that me and my family live in. And of the trades, electrical is my favorite because it's very quiet, and if it doesn't work right away. but don't get afraid of these, because they are opportunities to save a lot of money. The trades, electrical and plumbing, and these utility hookups can easily be a $20,000 chunk of the budgets. And I would throw out there for the folks that are on the Cape, the sub budgets are even more expensive relative to everywhere else that we've seen in New England. So if you're on the Cape, I would seriously consider trying to do some of this stuff on your own, because you will save a lot of money.
Chris, you want to keep talking? Tell us about what we're looking at here.
Oh yeah, so this is my new house that I'm taking a lot of DIY responsibility on the weekend. But this is a electrical trench coming into the house. You can see there, this is underground utilities. We mounted the meter on a pole away from the house. Partially, it was kind of a mistake, but it was also to help the neighbors get moved in faster, because in Maine, CMP won't start doing street utility work until there's a single meter put up. So we threw a meter up on an easel and said we have a meter up. But yeah, this is an electrical trench. Basically, if you want to try to install your own underground electrical, you're essentially digging a trench that's 3 feet deep. You're putting typically for a 200 amp service, 2.5 inch conduit in the ground. And then you're running really thick, heavy duty cable through it. And it's challenging, but it can be done. It's definitely a 2-person job. And then you're backfilling it with sand to make sure that you're not getting any rocks in there that could damage the wire or damage the conduit. And then you're putting on the red tape, which is super important. You got to get that red tape at least a foot above where the pipe is, and ideally near the surface. So someone grabs an excavator in there, they don't pull the wire up. So yeah, that's an electrical trench. It is DIY-able. It is a tough one though. And there is some risk involved in it, because you don't want to get it wrong. And you don't want to nick that wire.
Just circling back a little, to answer some questions. What is the cost difference in a shallow frost protected foundation versus a 4-foot frost wall? Or which is more expensive even?
Frost walls are significantly more expensive. And we honestly won't do it unless there's a good reason to. Just because it increases the risk. If you wanted to try to get in there for storage, or if there is a hill that forces the foundation to be taller, we would do that. But a 4-foot frost wall built in with typical concrete forms, it's more likely to have groundwater intrusion because you're digging deeper, and you're likely going to be below the water table at some point during the year. There's more air volume in a 4-foot crawl space. And when you have more air volume, it's harder to vent it. And it's more likely for moisture to build up. So, and it's also more concrete, which is more expensive. It's more insulation board, which it's expensive. Everything about it's more expensive. So we don't recommend it unless you have a hill or you want the storage.
it may turn into a swimming pool.
And honestly, I wouldn't, these crawl spaces are, I mean, I won't say some, a lot of our subs actually mostly in Massachusetts, for whatever reason, don't love working in the crawl spaces. But it's actually, in my opinion, quite enjoyable. You put a mechanic's crawler down there. It's got a built-in pillow and it's got wheels, and you just kind of lay down there with a headlamp. It's cool. It's not hot, and you just kind of hang out and do plumbing work and electrical work. And it's peaceful. There's probably no one else down there. But anyway, as you can see, I love working in the crawl spaces, but it may be something that that you're gonna have to explain to a sub when you're trying to hire them to hook up the plumbing and the electrical.
Yeah, I think of the Mission Impossible theme song when I'm down there. You know?
With a pillow,
Pillow and wheels, and yeah. Here's a couple more photos. These are, those conduits that Chris was talking about for electrical are stubbed up, and then the meters are getting mounted, and then your power company will come and actually put the glass meter in there and hook it up.
And you can split the DIY of electrical up too if you wanted to try to do that. You could have an electrician come in and bring the service from the street, which is a much scarier activity to do. There's a lot of risk involved in that. It's a lot of power. It's not breakered power. So you could split it up. You could have an electrician come do your service, and then if you wanted to dabble with installing a smoke detector in your attic, you could do it that way.
Awesome. You want to go for this one, Chris?
Yeah, so this is I don't know how many people on the call have ever seen a septic system being installed. I would imagine not very many, because this was actually only the first septic system I've ever seen installed, and I've been at this for a long time. And this was done just about a year ago. So unfortunately, in Massachusetts, you're not going to be able to install your own septic system. You have to be licensed to do that. Of course, in Maine, you can do whatever you want. So you can install your own septic system. I don't think this is a DIY activity. It's not incredibly technical or difficult to do this. It comes down to following the plan that was drawn by the licensed septic engineer. And it comes down to making sure stuff is leveled perfectly, so that the water flows and doesn't flow over the drainage path too quickly. But this is probably not something to DIY. And honestly, in Maine, septic prices are still low enough that I don't know that the labor savings is enough to justify trying to do it on your own. Unfortunately, that's not the case in Massachusetts. Septics are significantly more expensive in Massachusetts, but of course you can't do it on your own in Massachusetts because of the licensing.
All right, so another big piece, we've gone through the outside, the inside, hooking up utilities. Part of this, though, like Chris alluded to, is managing these subcontractors. Maybe you'll bring the electrician to run the service. Maybe you'll have the plumber install the water meter and the water service. That's so it's important to think about. There we go. In this process, and have the planning up front, monetarily, but also sort of from a construction workflow and calendar perspective of knowing when do you need to have things done in order to allow you to do other tasks. So a good example is before you can turn on those mini splits, the heating units, you're going to need the electrical on. They can come and install all the parts without power, but eventually they're going to need to hook it up, charge the system, test it, make sure everything works. So that's part of the savings there is managing your subcontractors. Part of what makes this job of being a GC difficult is managing the information. What is everyone's tasks? Do they know exactly what they need to do? Am I going to QC it? But also as things change, as the plumber doesn't show up for a week, or something's now back ordered and you need to pivot. But yeah, all that will come up managing subcontractors. But at the end of the day, it's about getting it done, making sure it's done on time, and on budget. What are you going to say,
And
Chris?
I would second. I mean, the managing subcontractors could be frustrating, but it's more frustrating and worrisome if you have a hard deadline. But if you've got time to do this, it doesn't matter if the plumber doesn't come back for 2 weeks. You can kind of just let that go. But the key is timing matters if you have a deadline, but if you don't have a deadline, you can let this kind of drag out for a while, and it will eventually get done. If you're too kind of lackadaisical on it, subcontractors will certainly take advantage a little bit, and you'll be their filler project. But again, that might help you save some money on it, and you don't have to feel like you have to schedule this stuff back to back. If the electrician gets there and can't do something because the plumber didn't get there, he's probably going to get angry, but he's going to leave. The plumber will come, and then the electrician will come back. It just ends up taking a little bit more time.
Awesome. So the real meat and potatoes of tonight is to show you our numbers, a background, what's going on, what are we coming up with in that design phase, to give you accurate pricing so you can be your own GC to decide, am I going to DIY this? Am I going to have backyard ADUs do it? Or am I going to hire a subcontractor? So I've made a dummy sheet tonight, where I have a dummy project that helped me populate all this. But we'll go through and look at how does this sheet work. So backyard ADUs in that feasibility study, before we even go into the design phase, we're going to get you that target budget, which on your site for what you want to build, we're sort of within 5 or 10%. So hey, I'm in the right ballpark for this project. We're going to break that out though and show you all these different categories. So where is that money going towards? Where can you find savings? And where are those items that, hey, maybe you're going to hire out? So in this example, there's a total budget here. This house for this design, if backyard ADUs does it, soup to nuts, it's priced out at $272,946. But we broke out every single category, everything we've gone through today, to price those out so someone could decide, do I want to pay backyard ADUs to do the whole thing, or do I want to DIY it? So the way we've structured this is this category here, direct cost or backyard ADUs budget, is showing you all of the categories that get us to that total project cost. But it's also a placeholder. So for example, let's look at HVAC. So for this house, for the unit we're designing, it's going to cost backyard ADUs $14,000 to install the HVAC units, to pay the HVAC person to do that. If the HVAC is something you don't want to take on, or you can't find an HVAC person, and you say, hey, I'm going to do a DIY shell, we can have our HVAC person come and do that. So we'll look at that. So let's start with.
And so I'm sure people are doing quick math in their head, 14,000 versus 17,500. Essentially, so as we talked about, if we're doing the whole thing, we have to pay project managers to make sure that the HVAC person comes there, to make sure that the thing was installed right, to make sure it works. And then if it stops working 6 months later, we have to be available to get them back over there and fix it. So basically that difference, the 17,500, the $3,500, is basically the cost for backyard ADUs to guarantee that it's done right and on time, and to be interacting with the HVAC person and making sure that they're also prescribing the right thing for the house. So you're basically paying for a guarantee, and you're paying for it to be managed. And that's why you'll look through here. Some things on here have a higher project management cost than others because they're harder to manage. And some have lower.
And the key, why are there those differences, is because we can cut out, if you're doing a DIY shell, our in-house construction services. So if I can actually draw an annotation here, within that budget, that 274,976 or whatever it is, $21,000 is our overhead. So that's to manage the project, to make sure everything's done on time, and to get all the materials and everything we need there to do it. But if you're going to DIY shell that, we can take that out because you're taking that on. You're going to be the GC. And that's why you're going to start to see those savings.
You can incrementally add some of that back in on an a la carte basis if you don't feel comfortable with something.
Yeah, so the foundation's a good one we talked about. So if we did that in-house, it costs us $13,500 to do it. But if you said, hey, I'm not really comfortable working with ICF or doing this whole shallow frost protected thing, you could hire us to come and do that, to get it done right and make sure it's done and ready for that delivery date for the house parts. But it would cost a little bit more because you're not paying us for the entire project. You're just paying us to do the foundation.
And looking at the foundation too, because this one is broken out well, same with kind of the installation numbers. So on these budget sheets, well, so we're a general contractor. We have we're keeping track of how much we think we're going to spend on materials, and then we're keeping track of how many hours it's going to be for our guys to work. Well, guys and girls, because we've got girls in the construction team. How many hours at our labor rates, which is $70 an hour, is it going to take for it to get done? So we're breaking that out. So if you're looking at the foundation, you can say, okay, if I wanted to try to build my own frost protected foundation, I am going to spend $9,923 on insulated concrete forms, insulation board, rebar, pressure treated lumber, and then I could save $3,600 in labor if I took that on. But you will spend the $9,923 on the materials. You won't find savings specifically on the foundation number. If you were going to attempt to do a 4-foot frost wall, you'll probably be able to do that for a little bit less on a material basis, but you might lose it when you're trying to waterproof it. But all of these individual line items have our actual material estimates and have our actual labor estimates. So you can go through here and make informed decisions about what you want to try to do on your own to maximize the amount of money that you're saving. And then the other thing I'd point out here, so this is a new endeavor for us. I think we've done we're up to at least 5 shells, I believe, that we've done. But we're still developing this. So you can see that, like in electrical, for example, we only have numbers in the material column. And that's because for electrical specifically, we have not started a database for electrical material supplies. And we just pay the electrician. We're not concerned with how much he's spending on materials. We have very good data on how much an electrician should be charging for the scopes of work in each of our regions. But we don't have great data on how much they're paying for conduit and meters. But that is something that we will start developing. The other thing of note, it's very particular in the trades, is that tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, HVAC, are getting pretty steep discounts when they're buying at their at an electrical supplier that you will not get, as something you keep in mind. GCs don't get very big material discounts. So you hear like, oh, if the GC buys it, they're gonna save a bunch of money. It's not generally true. Like if a GC has a Lowe's or Home Depot account, they may be saving 5%. And then on a purchase like flooring that costs more than $3,500, they might get 20%. Whereas on some of these other specialty items, it could be consistently 20 to 30. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, so let's look at a couple that we've gone over tonight. The good one's exterior. So this one, in this case, this house assumes vinyl. So like we saw, some of that vinyl is already installed in our factory, and the rest of those materials, it's all shipped loose. It's all in there. So you don't have to go out and buy any siding. It's all there. Your savings would be in the labor to install it. So if you're thinking, hey, what's the difference between me doing, vinyl versus wood? You're going to have to start crunching numbers with the material, but how much am I going to save in labor?
The best way we've seen people save money on siding material. So we had this happen both in Western Mass and in Maine. But we've had people source rough cut pine directly from a mill. And in New England, I think that's an opportunity for just about anyone who's living on the northern outskirts. I don't think that would work for Boston. I think it'd probably be hard in the Cape. But you can get rough cut pine for probably the same price you can get vinyl for. Vinyl is like $1.60 a lineal foot or square foot, and you could get rough cut pine for similar. You'd have to want to have that aesthetic of, but if you're doing a camp or it works with where you are, you could save some decent money and get a wood siding job, which really looks great.
Can you tell us what's the square footage of this example?
For siding?
No, for the total cost that we're looking at, like all these comparisons, are they made with a specific square footage house?
L-line, pretty close to it.
The L line?
Yeah, I think this is an 800 square foot L line. I think we're pretty close to that.
So another one we looked at on the inside is painting. Not a lot of materials. You're probably not going to be able to find paint anywhere cheaper, but where you're going to save that money up front is the labor. So you say, hey, I know what it's going to involve. I got to paint the ceiling. I got to paint the walls. I got to paint the trim. Every hour that you're spending, you're not hiring someone to do that. You can calculate that into your savings. And what's your total budget going to be at the end? Flooring and baseboard, that was one we highlighted as a material thing. So we typically have that in there, $5.50 a square foot, which gives people a lot of options of what they want, hardwood, LVP. But you can definitely go out there and find flooring that you like and that's cheaper. So you could both save on the material there and then also the install if you want to install your own floors.
Yeah, I know my the first two houses that my wife and I lived in, we renovated, and all of the materials that we bought to renovate came off Facebook. Well, actually, it was Craigslist because Facebook Marketplace wasn't really a thing 10 years ago. But it was Facebook Marketplace and it was Habitat for Humanity restores. And what we did was we would just, I don't know, do weekly trips to go see what's going in the stores. And we would just stockpile stuff in our garage. And it took a long time, but it saved a lot of money because you can get a really nice, I mean, for whatever reason, there's a lot of bathroom products at restores and building salvage. You can get a really nice vanity with a really nice top for $100 at a restore, and a new one starts at $400 to $500. So there's definitely some opportunity there.
Yeah, I've seemed to find a lot of medicine cabinets on the side of the road. I'm stockpiling in my garage, and I've got a couple really nice ones that, you know, off the shelf. Those are $300 or $400.
Have a medicine cabinet yard sale.
I'll need to do that soon. So we'll be able to populate this sheet for your specific project again, because we're going to do all that upfront due diligence in the design phase. And your small home advisor will be able to go through this whole thing with you and identify what do you want to DIY, what's backyard ADUs going to do, and then still look at that huge 60,000 foot view budget. So you know going into it, again, as close as you can, those guarantees on what's going to happen and what pricing is going to be. So for example, Chris talked about it earlier. Hey, maybe I don't want to do my own site work and I don't want to do my own foundation. So we could come in here and say, okay, well, we've designed the house. We're going to build it in the factory with everything we know. The kitchen's in there, the bathroom's in there. Like the photos we saw, drywalled, insulated, electrified, everything. All right, we have that price. That's certain. And then we come up here and say foundation. I'm not really comfortable going out and finding bids to try to say, hey, can I get this done for $13,500? I'm going to pay backyard ADUs. There's the guarantee and assurance that it's done. Okay, we'll pay backyard ADUs $17,500. And then again, I'm a little bit worried or nervous about the site work, getting it wrong, everything that could come up there. So I'll pay Backyard ADUs and their team to do it. So now I can get out my calculator and say, all right, modular, foundation, site work. I'm not paying Backyard ADUs in-house construction services. But I am going to pay to have the house designed and engineered. But I'm going to go get my own permits from the town, so I don't have to pay Backyard ADUs to do that. Now we've turned this sheet, which is custom to your project, into a worksheet. You can add everything up here, but you also need to know, you have everything you need to know to go out and figure everything else out. So, all right, I'm going to go figure out my own electrician. I have an estimate. This is how much, this is my benchmark for how much it might be if I went and hired someone. Maybe there's some savings in here in labor. We went over, can't have that yet in electrical. But you can go through the whole project and say, all right, well, I'm going to need to budget $269 for paint. So add that in. All right, at $550 a square foot, I need to account for materials, but I'm saving on labor for both of those. Interior finish work, I feel pretty comfortable doing the drywall at the marriage wall, the electrical panel, any cracking. So I'm saving on labor, but I should have some budget in there for materials. I got to get a couple new, hawks and tools, things like that. So you can now use this as a worksheet and actually calculate what's my project going to cost me.
Just to give a very vague and broad spectrum, if we did everything, this example, full on, versus if they did everything DIY, all of the options that are DIY-able, what's the lowest price it could go down to show that wide range?
Yeah, this white glove, us doing it's what, 272 at the bottom, and I believe this one DIY, which we probably should have put in this example, is 150, 160. So it's a big chunk of money. And then I think realistically speaking, because you're not going to do everything yourself. I mean, there might be somebody on the call that will, but sorry for saying that. But I think realistically speaking, you're going to save 20 to 30%. So you could probably get this sub 200 or right around 200. So it's a serious amount of money that you can save, and it's more than anything, I think it's going to feel really rewarding to say you did it. You're going to save the money, but you're going to go in and realize you did it too. And I think that's what the gentleman up in New Hampshire had said too. He said he's been having fun. He's had his highs, he's had his lows, he's got frustrated with subs, but ultimately he's loving going out to his land in New Hampshire and having something to do up there rather than just riding side by sides through the woods.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. The DIY shells I've worked on with homeowners, we do all this due diligence up front because that, budget's an important consideration. But they love living in a home that they designed, they planned, they manage as some contractors, and they finish it all themselves. So there really is some pride in it being their home.
Mm-hmm. I think so. We're getting close to time here, and I think we've covered.
You have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Yeah, let's get some final.
Me too. Yeah, final question. Are there options on your website of the various designs and architectural models you can choose from? And looking at the beginning photos, the South Portland house looked very different from the others.
Yeah, it's a pretty good question. The South Portland house is very different. I'd have to say it's the well, I will say it's the most expensive per square foot house we've ever built. But we have started to do more modern design, as you can see on the left. That house, we did partner with an architect on it. An architect did design it, and the architect did all of the finishing choices, which is why from the outside it looks absolutely stunning. The one on the left was not architect design, but as you can see, the color palette is also pretty amazing. And the homeowner that we worked with on that, she ran an interior design business for a while. So we worked very closely with her to make that happen. And she had an enormous amount of input on color choices. And then the one in the middle was fully us, which looks like a lot of what we've done with the blues and the grays and the white trim. But we have started doing a much bigger array of stuff. And on the website, there are the 6 design paths that we can start with. But how the house ends up coming, they can be very different, because we do love adjusting layouts. We don't love getting too into the weeds with material choices, because I mean, if you go online, there's thousands of options and you never know what's actually available, and it can get very time consuming. But we love doing the different roof lines. We love pulling different stuff together. And we do owe a rather big website update, because we built a lot of new houses this year. And I mean, these 3 are all new houses this year, and this is only a fraction of what we've done. So we do owe a pretty big update. Our portfolio has grown quite a bit.
Great.
And backing into that design phase is we'll, from the get-go, the feasibility, and in that design phase, sort of look at all the parameters and what you want. What do you want to do, both aesthetically, visually, and with a budget? So do we want to stick more with a design path? Do we want to go more custom? Or do you want to customize within a design path? It's all possible.
Is that the last question? I have one more.
Oh, sweet.
Anyone wants to stick
Lay 'em
around.
on.
What's the solar coming soon about? Can you speak a bit more to that?
Yeah, so solar, all of our houses are solar ready. All of our houses are fully electric, and all of the houses can be made zero typically with a solar array. So we're very close. All of the houses are just so darn close to being no utility bills. And I think we're up to 1, 2, maybe 7 of our houses that we built are fully net zero. And it's because the homeowners put solar panels on them. We are starting to work on bringing solar in-house so we can offer it at a decent price. And that would be, we hope that's going to be a big part of our shells, so we can provide net zero shells. So look for that going into next year. I am actually the guinea pig. Our team is DIYing solar on my house. And I'm always the guinea pig, because if it goes wrong, well, I'm not going to get too angry about it. And we're going to fix it before we do it again. So I think we're going to be doing the solar on my house by the end of the year. And then we'll be making decisions about rolling it out for next year, starting with our shells and for our all-in-one stuff. And we're pretty eager for it. We think it's the best way to add value to these houses. And markups on solar have gotten really high, especially in Massachusetts. As power rates increase, solar costs increase, but it's not following the cost of materials, unfortunately. Markups are just getting higher because they're trying to match payback periods. I mean, I could go on and on about some of the price differentials in solar between Maine and Massachusetts and just different suppliers in Maine. It's ridiculous. But yeah, keep an eye out for it. We're going to hope to roll that out next year and hopefully do better pricing on solar.
And if you're a Mass, going back to what we said earlier, you'll likely qualify for that $10,000 to $12,000 rebate. And that's a great chunk of change you'll get down the road, which, financially could help make solar possible to have your home be net zero.
Awesome. If anyone else has any other questions, I know Tim has the emails up there. Jeff isn't with us right now. He just had a little baby. So Chris is standing in for him as the main small home advisor until he's back from paternity leave. And I put his email in the chat for everybody along with Tim. So if you're in Maine, send any questions or interest to Chris. And if you're in Massachusetts, to Tim. And I think that's about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. And we look forward to meeting some of you in person and hopefully helping you build. Have a great night.